All right, everybody. Hola, hola, hola. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Ojalá que estén bien. Hey, everybody. This is Tasha. Tasha teaches Spanish. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Miles gracias for tuning in to another episode of Hablamos Español. If this is your first time watching, Hablamos Español exists to highlight those who contribute to the diversification of foreign language learning. And that just is a fancy title I gave it to say, hey, I want to show y'all that Black people speak other languages too. Or what you consider Black, what you think when you see Black, we are in those spaces as well. Because if you grew up like I did or similar, even if you take it back to college, high school, I don't know what high school you went to, but high school or college, you're in the foreign language class, we'll go to college because it's a choice. You decide to, well, sometimes, but you're in there, you're looking around, you're like, hey, nobody looks like me. So often others think that that's not for us to learn, Portuguese, Francés, but oftentimes we think it's not for us. And that's why we exist, to let other people know, let ourselves know, and other folks know, hey, we're in this too. We're serious and we're able and capable. But that's enough. I digress. Tonight, esta noche tenemos con nosotros Violeta Donawa. Bienvenido, Violeta.
Gracias, Tasha. Gracias por esta invitación.
Yes, ma'am. Y qué guapa eres. You're so pretty. All right. So I've already kind of mentioned what Hablamos Español is and why we exist. We start every episode off with the introduction of the guest, but it's in Español, sorpresa. So for you, the viewer, this gives you an opportunity to see what you do know, what you don't know. Obviously, if you're intermediate or advanced, you're going to get it. But this is for you too, the beginner or the person who's never considered learning. Still test out what you know. You probably know more than you realize. And before I forget, because my memory's kind of bad sometimes, I have recently been nominated for an award, and I'm not going to mess up the company's name or anything, because I didn't even know about this until I got the email. So please look on my YouTube page, my social media, our Facebook, our Instagram for the information or details on how to vote for Tasha Teaches Spanish. I believe, and I'm waiting on confirmation, that I was nominated for this program, because this is the only thing I do in media. I do nothing else. So I am very honored to have received that nomination. Don't want to mess up the organization's name, but just look out for our social media and those announcements so that you can vote if you feel so inclined. All right. Now it's about Violeta. Entonces, Violeta, sabemos tu nombre ya, pero ¿de dónde eres?
Yo soy de los Estados Unidos, claro. Yo nací en la gran ciudad que se llama Detroit, Michigan. Pero yo vivo afuera de la ciudad, en una ciudad que se llama Ypsilanti, por la Universidad de Michigan. ¿Qué más? Yo tengo...
Perdón mi interrupción. Y para mi conocimiento, el nickname para esta ciudad es something city, Ford City. I don't remember. No recuerdo.
¿Cuál ciudad? ¿Ypsilanti o Detroit?
Detroit.
Oh, Detroit, the Motor City.
Gracias. Porque es conocido para tus compañías de los troques. Ok, gracias a ti.
Exactamente.
Ok, perdóname, sigue.
Ok. ¿Qué más? Me encanta, yo adoro mi ciudad, Detroit. Pero mi madre es afroestadounidense, mi padre es afro-panameño. Él migró en el 1968, entonces hace mucho tiempo.
Sí.
Y ¿qué más?
Oh, tengo las preguntas aquí, Tu trabajo o trabajos, ¿pero qué haces?
Sí, yo soy trabajadora social y una terapeuta. Entonces, yo trabajo con clientes que quieren mejorar su bienestar y salud mental y salud espiritual, emocional, etcétera. Entonces, me encanta el trabajo.
Necesito hacer una cita. Porque
¿Cuándo, hermano?
Necesito ayuda, ¿ok? Ok, muy bien. Pero ese trabajo, en tu opinión, ¿es un trabajo muy pesado debido a los cuentos y las tristezas de otros? ¿Es pesado?
Sí, en general casi sí, pero especialmente ahora adentro de la pandemia, porque este es un tiempo muy pesado para terapeutas en nuestras vidas también. Y al mismo tiempo tenemos que, ¿cómo se dice? Aguantar, like hold espacio para otras personas en el mundo. Entonces, es trabajo muy importante, pero pesado casi sí.
Sí, sí, es porque es como mientras tú, la terapeuta, ¿cómo se dice? Perdón.
Terapeuta.
Como la terapeuta tiene que mantener sus problemas, tiene que también mantener los problemas de otros.
Exactamente.
Ok, continuamos. Pues gracias por todo que tú haces.
Sí, por nada.
Cuando tengas el tiempo libre, ¿cómo son o cuáles son tus pasatiempos? ¿Qué haces
Sí,
en tu tiempo libre?
sí, mis pasatiempos son escuchar música, escuchar podcast, pasando el tiempo con mi novio, hablando con mi madre, porque ella es mi persona favorita.
Oh, qué bonito.
Y sí, I mean, ahora, like, quedarme en casa. También,
Sí,
yeah.
no hay muchas opciones. Ok.
No.
Tú has hablado ya un poco de tu mamá, de tu familia, de tu mamá, de tu papá. ¿Tienes hermanos o otra parte de la familia?
Sí, tengo 3 hermanos, una hermana mayor y 2 hermanos que, ¿cómo se dice? Que that is younger than her, que menos de ella. Y
Pero más mayor de ti.
exactamente, yo soy the
Entonces,
youngest.
ok, la bebé. Tú eres la menor, tienes 3 mayores, pero tú querías dar la orden. Ella fue primera, ellos
Ujú,
y
y
tú. Ok.
entonces no. Ujú.
Ok, muy bien, la bebé. Ok. Y al final, tu cantante latino favorito y
Ah,
canción latina favorita. Cantante y canción.
sí, ahora es vivir mi vida por Marc Anthony, aunque me encanta una artista que se llama Camilo, y yo creo que él es de España, España o Colombia. Hay
Camilo.
muchos artistas ahora eh, en la música de Colombia, pero yo creo que él es de,
Camilo Echeverry.
yo creo que sí.
Tiene un bigote como así.
Así.
Sí, dice aquí de Colombia.
Sí, sí. Él tiene música muy buena, pero
Sí.
ahora me gusta Marc Anthony porque la canción Vivir mi vida es una canción por la lucha
Sí.
y la importancia que mantener nuestra espíritu,
Paz,
y paz
mentes.
mental y otras cosas así.
Ujú,
Entonces, es una canción muy fuerte, entonces me gusta mucho.
sí. Pero gracias por decirme de Camilo. Una cosa que me encanta de las entrevistas, siempre aprendió algo nuevo de la música. Porque la semana pasada, tú conoces una canción, se llama Yo no sé mañana por Luis Miguel.
Mm-mm.
Yo tampoco, pero una persona que yo entrevisté, me dijo de esta canción, ahora me encanta. Entonces, cada semana aprendió algo nuevo. Ahora yo conozco Camilo
Camilo.
con el bigote. Okay, en fin. All right, so to you, the viewer, thank you for holding in there for 9 minutes. Go you. So if you're a beginner, I hope you didn't, get too turned off or anything, and definitely I hope you caught some words. Stick around because Violeta will have the same conversation more or less in English at the end, so you get confirmation on what you didn't know. ¿Está bien? All right, so Violeta, one thing I just learned today is that you are Afro-Latina. And so that will not change really all the questions, but I think it's going to change the first one, because if in that case, since you are Afro-Latina, did you decide to learn Spanish, or you just always knew it or always grew up with it? What's been your experience with Spanish since it's in your culture?
Exactly. Well, I feel like en español o en inglés.
English.
Okay, great. So little bit by little bit throughout my life, like Spanish has always been around me. So, but it was like the language of like my dad and his sisters, my aunt. And so because we're Panamanian, Panamanians have a long history of both English and Spanish. But the English is from British colonialism, and the descendants from Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, where my family is from. You have folks from those islands. You have people from Martinique, different types of Black Caribbean laborers coming over to help build the Panama Canal. So my family is a part of that history. And so that was like the early 1900s. And so there are two core types of Black Panamanians in Panama: the ones who were freed enslaved Africans, and who were dominated by Spain, and then the Black Caribbean folks, so who came in. So those are my people. And so because of that mix of being in the country for so long, we have that Spanish piece as well.
That is really cool. For those who don't know, because I just learned about it like last year, I know they said, what is the Panama Canal, and what was it? Why was it a big deal, or is a big deal? What are you talking about when you say that?
That's a big question. So the Panama Canal was a space that was largely occupied by French powers and U.S. American powers. And in 1999, Panamanians got the Panama Canal given back to them. The Panamanian Canal was a way to kind of shortcut through circumnavigation by water. So it sits at the middle of the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, if I'm not mistaken. And so it has a huge role in like world trade and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big deal, and it's a really politicized place. And it was a big deal when Panamanians got it back in 1999. And so we can say a whole lot of stuff about U.S. occupation and things like that, but I want to like, we will be here all day.
I know. I just wanted a little taste. That was good. You gave me a little taste. That's good. And guys, obviously, you can Google it. But yeah, it's I like your points. When I think about it, I just think of it as a big money maker, a big economic source, and things like that. But yeah, that was good. That was a good point. Other good points you raised. Okay, that is great. So you were saying that you grew up around it. It was largely the language of your dad's people. So when did it become something for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was always there. And it's hard because when you're little, like I remember me and my brother, like we weren't raised speaking it, even though we were around it. And we would kind of like joke and play with each other, trying to practice and things like that.
Yeah.
But like it didn't really become a part of my life until college, where I was like actually actively trying to learn it. But I think that was hard for me. I think that's when some of my like early onset anxiety kind of set in, because I'm in this classroom as an Afro-Latina, as an Afro-Panamanian, with other U.S. American folks who are getting it in a specific way because it's not the second generation like stressors there. So in my mind, it's like, I should have this by now. Like this shouldn't be hard. I should be balling out of control in this class, but actually my body is freezing and my heart is hurting. And like, I don't know the specific type of learning style that I needs to take into account my cultural basis. But I didn't have a lot of teachers. Like back then, nobody was really talking about Afro-Latinidad except for Afro-Latinos. So it was a huge cultural barrier actually in the classroom to learn Spanish. So I had like 1 or 2 semesters and I was like, this sucks. The teachers don't get me.
No.
And so everything was like, my aunt became my tutor. My aunt was an ESL teacher in Southwest Detroit for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so she was my tutor. I would practice a little bit with her, practice a little bit with my dad. But I still had a lot of anxiety, like I should be XYZ, like I should, blah, blah, blah. But it really didn't take off until and I had a good friend who I lived with, and she's a Spanish teacher now down in Atlanta, Isis Smith, a really wonderful teacher in person and spirit. And so I would practice somewhat with her, but it really didn't take off for me until this year during the pandemic, when I was like, I need coping strategies for being at home, and I need to be doing deep healing work while I have this time. And so I started this language and diaspora program with Afro-latinidad, with Jamila Ball. And so it was amazing because you have all these Black folks learning together, and you have Black USN folks, you have second generation folks who, it was another Afro-Panamanian in the group, and Afro-Boricua in the group, right? So we have this safe space, this diasporic space where we can learn together and we mutually can empathize, right, with each other's language journeys in a way. If you're learning in a traditional classroom where people don't even know that Black people exist in Latin America, it's a cultural gap that this program was able to fulfill.
That is wonderful. And the name of that, in case anybody's interested, the name of that program again?
Language and Diaspora.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Well, and what you mentioned a good point on the lack of conversation in your typical classroom about even the African heritage or connection to Latino America. And I will say this, and for me, my experience has been coming to get my master's now. If it comes up, it's just always like, to me, what I consider glorification of colonization. Because I just had this class dealing with the masterpieces of literature, and the first, month or two, I'm getting tired of reading all these texts about colonization, and it's a difference between telling the truth and the facts, and to me, getting a little too deep, or like, let's move on. I'm over it, guys. I'm getting tired of continuing to read these texts, because to me, when you continue, and this isn't anything, but when you continue to talk about it and harp on it, I think somebody's a little too excited about it. In my opinion, it kind of can border on that, depending on how you have the conversation. So for me, I was like, this is getting annoying. Versus balancing it with Afro-latinidad, like you said, balancing with Afro-Latino poets or writers or something. Give me something else. So I can definitely see that being an issue in this typical classroom.
Yeah,
it was good. So what did you? And now this is a later question, but I think it connects right now. Stop. I got a better question. Let's go back to your anxiety, because I was going to ask you this. It's very common, which I don't know if you knew this before you dove in, but I learned the hard way years back. It's really common that those second and third generations, especially that third, don't know it and don't want to know it. I've heard parents, they'll say, they just came, or they second generation, but usually they just came. So their children are here in school. Their children may not learn it, but as soon as may not know much English, but as they learn more English, they speak less Spanish. And parents will say like, they don't want to know, and blah, 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 blah. I've had to pep talk a couple of kids like, baby, you have some gold in your home, keep it. So where were you getting those words that you ought to know it? Did your dad ever say that, or your aunt? Was somebody pushing you on that end, or it's just something that you just internalized on your own? Where'd you get that from?
I mean, when I was 7, I was paying attention to my aunt's kitchen smells like this, and my mom's kitchen smells like this. These are both Black people. This is a very specific experience I'm having, because I'm smelling spices, right? I'm smelling Caribbean and Panamanian spices, and I'm smelling like African American spices in my mom's kitchen. And so from a very young age, I was always asking questions around race and ethnicity. Like having a name like Violeta, like, people don't know what to do with it, right? People don't know what to do with that. Like, are you from someplace else? Is this name ghetto? Like, what is the thing, right?
Not ghetto, Lord of mercy.
Yeah, so for a kid, I didn't have the language for like that question is classist, right? Like that there's something imbued in that question. And then there's this thing around my name kind of being a marker for like there's a question mark there, right? And so as a kid, I was always curious, very similar to how I am now. And so, there would be things that my dad would say, like I would be telling my dad, like, the world is hard and it's annoying. And he would just say, así es la vida. And I'm like, Dad, what does that mean? And he's like, that's life. And so there were always things kind of around. And so, I done lost track of the question.
The question was, what made you have that anxiety and beat yourself up for not knowing language, since it is common the second and third generationers don't have it and don't want it sometimes.
Yeah, so that don't want it piece is really interesting, right? Because we have these different systems of oppression and the way that racism interacts with xenophobia, like it puts people in a really precarious situation around how do I negotiate my identity in a specific way. And when you're born here, second or third generation, and in some ways 1.5 generation, if somebody came at like 14, 15, 16, 17, right, they're being in an environment is like being a fish in the water. So there's some type of osmosis that's just happening because the culture around you is different. And you're going to just naturally, being a therapist, right? I love the brain. So the brain is going to naturally absorb certain information and certain data from the environment that's going to start making people shift and think in ways that they hadn't imagined if they were in a different environment. And so the test really becomes, if you're second and third generation, what does it look like to practice mindfulness? And for me, well, let me finish that sentence before it comes out the wrong way. To practice mindfulness about how we want to show up as cultural bearers of our parents' or grandparents' countries and the countries that we were born in. So I consider myself in some ways like a family historian. I'm digging into information about, you know, my mom's great grandparents from West Virginia and Black Appalachia. I'm digging into my father's paternal side or my father's side, digging into what does it mean for us to be Caribbean from La Ciudad de Panama and from Colon, right? Like Colon has a very special and specific history in Panama. And so I've designated, so a part of this language work is spiritual work for me. So I've designated myself as a cultural broker because I kind of got placed in a position to be that. Because as a kid, I was always negotiating. Blackness looks different in all these different homes in my family in a way that is different from my peers. And so now what is the call for me? I'm putting this language on it now because I'm an adult and I can do that. As a kid, I was just like, I'm at an intersection and sometimes it makes me really sad and I don't know what to do about it. And I want to do something about it. And at that time, it was like, why the only people that I'm really looking at, I'm asking my dad, like, Dad, at the time, everybody was using Hispanic. People weren't really using Latinos yet. So I remember being in the basement and asking my dad, we had like a finished basement, we would watch TV. It's kind of like a man cave. So I was like, Dad, like, why? I was like, are we Hispanic? Like, why are the only people that I see on TV who people call Hispanic, they look like like, why do we look different? What is that? And so, like, why aren't we there? And so he would be like, yeah, like we're Hispanic. Like, you know, why aren't they there? Like, I don't know. Like as the first generation, like my dad wasn't.
He was used to it. He had grown up in it, and I guess not being seen and not being represented, so wasn't a biggie to him.
No, I just feel like it wasn't a biggie to him because he was first generation. Like he wasn't negotiating anything about his identity because he was always himself. He came from a country where the majority of the country looked like him. So he's not catching the things that I'm catching because I'm negotiating. Like I'm in a bit of a different container. As a second generation Panamanian than my dad is. And so I don't know, maybe it's because he's a guy. I don't know. But he was not pressed about it. But I was, and it put me in a position to be a therapist now. And I also am like trained as a sociologist. And so a lot of my work has dealt in and out of the diaspora, the African diaspora. So so yeah, it was really like a early frustration that set the path for my work now.
So just to clarify, you weren't getting, because I want to go back to the original, where did you get the anxiety or the pressure that I should know this by now as far as the language? Yeah. So it sounds like that's something you got from, it's just yourself, because it didn't sound like your dad or anybody was pressuring you to know Spanish. Where did that stem from? It just came from you.
So no. It came from this social construction of Latinidad in a way that didn't take into account Panamanian history. So because like I mentioned earlier, like Panamanians, like we have English. It might be patois, but we have English, and maybe it would be patois. But from my understanding, from my aunts, my grandmother would still like get on them about speaking English well. Now that could be charged, but that was my grandmother's like standard. And so, we know that means like standard, like British English, right? For like Caribbean folks.
Yes, ma'am.
So because we had that, it wasn't odd that my family was speaking to me in English. It wasn't odd that like our parents and aunts and uncles and so forth would speak to us in English, because English was a part of how they also spoke to their grandparents, because their grandparents or their parents, my grandmother and my grandfather spoke English and Spanish, but it varies. But their parents did not. And so there's this conversation now with Panamanians, like, what does it mean to have millennial age, Gen Z age Panamanians who may speak Spanish fluently, but they don't speak English? And the reason that question comes up is because that English piece connects to Panamanian heritage, also going back to anglophone islands, right? The Panamanian laborers who came over to help build the canal. And so there's this duality of Spanish and English that's very different from folks that might be from PR, folks that might be from DR, and other parts of Latin America, specifically if they didn't have a huge amount of Black Anglophone Caribbean migration. So we see some of that in like Nicaragua. A lot of folks from, for example, Bluefields. There's a Afro-Latino blogger who's really great from Bluefields, Nicaragua, and he talks about the Anglophone Black Caribbean migration to the coast.
Excuse me to interrupt you, because you're doing so well.
Yeah,
Just from my education,
yeah.
What do you mean by Anglophone? What is that? I don't think I know Anglo. I hear Anglo-Saxon, which is a white person. So what's Anglophone?
You right on it, sis. So Anglophone meaning like English speaking. So
okay.
Who were the colonizers? Who were the people enacting colonialism, right? And we know the French, the Portuguese, Spain, French, Portuguese, Spain, Dutch, right? The British, like we know all those things. And so for a time in my 20s, there was a time when I didn't beat myself up about it, because I was like this language is still connected to, has a deep seat in colonialism and colonization. Like, do I really need to speak to, like, right? Do I really, like, it would be great to get to the indigenous language right? But like, you got to respect what time is, right? So I was born with this tongue, and this tongue was born in the Americas, and like, so the language that I speak would be of the Americas. And so, so it's different layers, I think, in terms of language learning, because it was anxiety at one time. And then it was like, well, I don't care, because do I really need to speak a colonial language? Like, it's not a big deal. Like, but I also think as my dad ages and as that generation gets older, something is like, there's a both and here that I want to pay attention to. Like, sure, but I also want the responsibility of knowing that I'm mindfully learning this language, and it's not to aspire to any colonial orientation. It's not to aspire to not want to be Black, because there are sub conversations around things like that. But yeah, so a lot of this work is lineage work for me. It's intergenerational healing work. It's intergenerational trauma work. So in order to kind of minimize some of those anxieties, and this is the last part I'll say, to kind of minimize some of those anxieties, especially when I started with language and diaspora, Jamila is a really, really great coach, because she came in and she just has this particular philosophy where so much about language learning is about mindset. And so she has a way about her that brings that to the surface. So for me, I was like, oh, this is deeper than rap. Like, I need to take this to my therapist. I need to take this to my meditation teacher. I need to take this to my hypnotherapist, and I need to figure out, how do I get to the root? Because something was in my nervous system. This whole should thing, like, I should, generation, I should be able to do this, right? And even when we have folks who might easily be called Latinos, folks who are like mestizo, for me growing up, it was like, because the way our society is set up, unless you're like from New York, I don't know, maybe that's not a good comparison. But being from the Midwest, we don't have in Michigan, it's not a huge Afro-Latino population like you would have in New York and DC and things like that. So it would just be like a certain expectation of why are you speaking Spanish or why are you a
Mm.
Black person when someone who's not Black but Latino who didn't speak Spanish, they wouldn't get the same questionings.
That's a good point.
That's something that I would notice, and that was hard for me kind of growing up. And there's a lot of people doing powerful work around that too.
Yeah.
But we could be here all day, all the days long.
But you know what? That's a good point that is going to make me segue because, well, in two ways. Because a future question on the list is how do people respond when you speak Spanish? But that will say that, okay, over here. But I want to talk about my first experience meeting a Panamanian. I didn't know anything about Panama, and I sure didn't know it was a large Afro-Latino population. And so I was at my first job here. I was a bilingual receptionist in the U.S. Not my first job, but my first job after I came back from Spain. So I'm sitting in the office or the waiting space working, and then I hear some Spanish, which is normal, right? And then I happen to look up, and they look just like me, and so I'm confused. I'm like, because see, I'm in Arkansas, and this the racial thoughts in Arkansas: white, Black, and they say Mexican. They don't even like to realize that it's from people from everywhere. White, Black, Mexican. That's what they're gonna say. So that's all we got. Right, no space in between. Even though we do have a substantial French population because of a company that's here, and quite a few Asians, and I don't mean like not just Middle Eastern, I guess Asia or that India, but Chinese or Japanese. It's a large influx. Korean, Vietnamese. We have those other large Marshallese population too. Anyway, but and I grew up here. This is home, so that psyche is in me. What's here? White, Black. I knew it wasn't Mexican. I'm gonna say Latino. I knew better than that. Anyway, and so I here am a rare commodity. I'm a African American woman. I'm not Afro-Latino. I'm somebody that was born in the country, raised in the country. Just happened to learn more and do more after college and got the language. So I'm a rare commodity. So I'm thinking to myself, it ain't too many people like me here. Who are these folks in this office, So I end up asking a few questions, because you never know if you ask questions that people get offended. So I didn't ask too much, but enough to learn that they were from Panama and that there's a substantial Afro-Latino population. I just kind of let Google do the rest. But then I ended up meeting this other man from there, and I've met some Panamanians. I probably like 5 Panamanians so far. And in Arkansas, I'm like, what are y'all doing here? But that was just a beautiful cultural experience for me. I want to say that the first Afro-Latino I knew was Celia Cruz, but in real life, that may have been the first Afro-Latino person I saw, a Panamanian person in a doctor's office. So it definitely, I'm sure, is a question starter. I mean, it's for me, but it's more so for you because that's your root. So I guess it goes deeper for you. Now, we'll jump to the question that's farther down on the list. Your experiences or the responses you get when you do speak in public and I'm going across the board. I think it's a little different. So number one, Latinos, and I mean mestizos, the people who pass or, people look at them and say, you're Latino, that group, because they, our society says that's their language and they own it. So, and then I'm going to say everybody else, Black, white, whatever. So what are those responses when you begin to speak in public? How do people take that?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. So especially because of the pandemic, right? Like I'm not doing a lot of like public talking with folks. And because this deep dive happened because of the pandemic, because I was at home, so it's not a lot of conversation that I'm doing like outside of my normal like crew.
Yes, ma'am.
There's like a small corner store, like a Mexican owned corner store, and so sometimes I go in there to buy things and I like pay for things in Spanish, but it's not a lot of conversation that people are trying to have while you masked and like, you know what I mean? So it's like you might see like an eyebrow go up, like I see you, but like we can't really, it's not really comfortable to
it's
talk.
just a transaction. Let's get in, get out. Yeah,
but it's the noticing, right? So honestly, for a long time, the only person I really spoke Spanish to on a regular basis was my dad. And most of the Latinos who aren't Black, who would be identified as mestizos, like are also either bilingual or English only, and so we speak in English anyway.
So far, it sounds like so far you haven't gotten that experience just yet to be out talking and somebody look like, oh, it's that's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
I mean, I guess you can kind of say that, but like I'm in an environment where it's not a lot of Spanish speaking happening.
Okay.
It's just an English dominant city. Like I know that there are native Spanish speakers like in Ypsilanti. But I just also moved to Ypsilanti, like outside of like, so it's, and being in the pandemic, like certain things are just kind of modified. The place where I speak the most Spanish right now is in the 6-month program that I'm in, language and diaspora. And as far as like strangers are concerned, maybe not in public, but there's an app I use called Tandem. And so I'm speaking back and forth sometimes with people from Tandem because it's a language exchange app.
Kind of like, I guess, italki or something.
Yeah.
And this has nothing to do with Spanish, but I went on and looked up the name of where you say you're from. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. What's the details of this city? What kind of name is this? Is this a Native American, something I never seen? And even a county, Washtenaw. Do I have that right?
Yeah, Washtenaw County. So in Michigan,
what is the history of this place?
There's a lot of indigenous roots in Michigan, as in across the U.S. And so like the land that I'm on is Anishinaabe land, but the last name Ypsilanti was actually from, I believe that last name is Finnish. I'm not sure, but he was a governor or some person in power at some time. Yes, but it's not an indigenous last name. But you will find across Michigan there are lots of different indigenous names for things.
Wow. And I'm sure when I typed it, I sure put in IP something wrong. It's a Y, Tasha. It's a Y. But okay, this is interesting. I'll look that up later. That was just something, because as I talk to my guests, I like to Google whatever we're talking about, like the Camilo, that guy. So I just had to ask about that. I thought it was two different words. Ypsilanti. That's what I put in. Wrong. Okay. All right. We're doing pretty well on time. We have a little over 20 minutes. So we have discussed quite a bit. Your specific experience with Afro-latinidad, your experience with the language, how you acquired it, why you acquired it, the difficulties therein. So let's see here. And you already mentioned being in the program and that you're on Tandem. So that connects to how do you keep your skills sharp?
Yeah.
Once you got past the anxiety and the mental and psychological aspects, what just about the language, as far as grammar and basics, has been most difficult? And especially since you really dug into it recently, what has been most difficult for you about the language? Not the psychological, just the grammar. And
all the conjugations. Like I've had to, I'm gonna do a little psychological thing. So yeah, the conjugations have been hard sometimes, but the way that my mind works, I'm like, okay, if I really want to get these distinctions between imperfect and preterite, like which is for the people who are watching, right, talking in the past, what I'm really trying to tap into is how do people storytell? Like, so either the podcast, videos I want to listen to, like I'm paying attention to storytelling and oral histories, because that's where I'm gonna find all the preterite and imperfect. I can't find it in the day-to-day, but that's not as exciting to my natural like interest.
And none of this is good.
Yeah, and then for trying to practice future tense, like what I'm like, okay, I need to be listening to podcasts or listening to conversations where people are planning or talking about planning things. And so yeah, because like kind of doing grammar stuff just for the sake of learning, like my motivation won't stay, my discipline won't stay. I tie it into things that I'm already curious about every day. So
that makes sense. Okay, so that has been most challenging, but you're already finding ways to work with that. And that's the good point. How do we storytell? Because even in English, we'll talk about something in the past and use present tense. Yesterday I went to the store and this is what she told me. That's told. And I was in there, and then all of a sudden, I decided I'm gonna pick this up, and I'm going to buy this. We combine it too. That's a good point.
I think a lot of that too. Like I haven't paid attention that much. I'm sure it's in. Well, actually, I'm not sure. I feel like in AAVE, like for like African American Vernacular English, like that is how we talk. Like we play around, because if you look at the language formation of AAVE, like it has structure to it. And a part of the structure to it is that when we talk about the past tense, we can use the present tense at the same time. Are people validating that? No. But you do see similar things in Spanish and other Romance languages, where there is this, where you can say, you can tell me if I'm about to screw this up or not, but I feel like you can say something like, I don't know, hace 3 meses yo aprendo something, 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 blah. Like, can you do that? Like, if you say, like,
you said 3 months ago, I learned something.
Yeah, but you don't switch it to like aprendí, or do you switch it to aprendí?
Yeah, because it happened 3 months ago.
Okay, well, maybe
are you saying 3 months ago, or it's been 3 months since, or 3 months ago?
Maybe I'm saying it's been 3 months since. In which way does that actually play out?
For me, this is me. I'll be like, hace 3 meses yo aprendí inglés, so español. 3 months ago, I learned Spanish. But that's the thing about learning, and that verb, learning isn't a one-time thing. So maybe I started learning. That's something that's preterite and definite on when it started. So then that's empezar, empecé. So it's a lot. But yeah. But that's the thing about me. And I'm going to tell you this, Violeta. I'm not a technical person. Like, I'll say it and be wrong and keep moving unless the speaker corrects me, especially if I can get close. You know, I'm a real loosey-goosey learner. I've been this way. So like now I have to get more technical now that I'm teaching it. You don't want to teach it right. But because for me, I would never start if I was worried about the technicalities and being anal and being correct every time. Look, I'm going to say this and blah, 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 let's keep going. Me entiendes, no perfecto, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I get it, because even with that little example, that we could be racking our brains for 20 minutes thinking about, is it right? Ooh, look, did you understand? Man, entiendes, no perfecto, everything. But yeah,
if it's not Spanish, then maybe I'm confusing a little bit of that structure with Portuguese, because I learned Portuguese at one point because I lived in Brazil and I lived in Angola, and so sometimes that's another thing. Probably what I do that kind of is difficult is smushing sometimes those things together, like Spanish.
But even with structure, you know, in Spanish, you can put something a couple different ways. You know, ¿cómo está usted? ¿Cómo usted está? You know, the pronoun can go a different couple places. And once again, I'm just not I'm gonna say it how I say it and move on, because I'm not gonna have no low self-esteem over my Spanish. So, look, I know Spanish. This is how I say it. Yeah. But anyway. That's a good point. You made a good point. So for you, the most difficult thing so far has been the conjugations and also preterite and imperfect. But you're finding a way around it. That's really good. Let me see here. How have you seen, or have you found, if you've had the opportunity yet, since you mentioned the season in which you're learning? But I'm sure you have an answer. How have you found that learning Spanish has benefited you personally, professionally, and in any other way?
Yeah, that's true. So that presents me to like the virtual work that's been happening. So really one of the ways that I see learning Spanish right now benefiting me is being able to engage in cross-cultural conversations and like cross-linguistic conversations around mental health, community care, and self-care during this time. And so those things are happening. Yeah.
Okay, good, beautiful. Have you yet had a Spanish-speaking client, or do you ever think you'll start to advertise to that community for your therapeutic services?
Yeah. I would love to, and it's always tricky, right? Like there are some ethical questions about, you know, how competent are you in a language that you can
good point.
People, right? And so maybe that's actually one of my dreams, to kind of do some more like community care work, holding space for Spanish speakers specifically, and to be honest, like specifically Afro-Latinos, because I think even when we're looking for therapists who understand our migration stories, our race stories, etc., sometimes finding that can be difficult, even with another Spanish-speaking therapist, if they're not, and you don't always have to share the same identities as your therapist, right? But we need more Afro-Latino therapists with visibility. So I would love to kind of do that work.
That's good. That's a great goal, a great vision. Okay, let's see here. We've gone so many different routes, but a lot of the questions have been answered in the numerous routes in which we chose. Okay, I'm gonna say this one, and then we really probably can wrap up. People automatically assume when you learn Spanish, and since your route is not, I'm gonna say it's kind of non-traditional, but it's not academia set. So maybe a little different answer. But if you found this at all, and if not, that's fine. But especially when a person's like studying it or things like that, and people and your family start to know or you're learning Spanish, and you're gonna make that big money. People just assume when you know Spanish, here comes the 100,000 a year, which that's big money to me. Everybody has different goals. 100,000 a year job, and here comes the big money. Have you found that as to be a common assumption that learning another language means you're gonna be rolled over in dough?
No,
No.
really, because as a social worker, like social workers in general don't make a lot of money. So there are social work positions that might offer maybe $3,000 more or something like that, but that's not a whole lot. It's definitely not pushing 100,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, social workers deserve that, but you know what I mean? So yeah, we're not there yet. So
yes, ma'am. So even a bilingual social worker wouldn't make that much more. Like you said, it's about maybe 3,000 more.
Yeah, and also if you think about the amount of labor, like a bilingual therapist is actually doing, so like the amount that they would need to be paid to really take into account how much labor it takes to engage in that type of mind work, like that's intense. Like that's deep. And so bilingual social workers also should just be paid, be paid a little bit more.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Okay, good. Okay, good points. Good points. Well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. Is there anything before we get to your introduction in English for the viewers that were here in the beginning? Anything in general that you want to add to our time together? A funny story, a message to people who want to learn, or a message to whoever, anything that maybe I didn't ask that you wanted to touch on.
We've covered so much ground. I cannot think of anything. The only thing that I would say that I haven't seen in the larger language learning kind of field is if you can make this a spiritual experience, make it one. If you can see language learning as something that your mental health, that as you progress, you start to feel better about yourself, your self-efficacy increases. And then see if you can translate that greater sense of confidence and that greater sense of self-efficacy to other areas of your life, right? See if you can make that a transferable internalized skill, if that makes sense. Because it can be that deep. Like it just can be. So yeah, make language a spiritual experience if you can.
That's nice. I've never heard it in my life. So thank you for even enlightening me and opening my mind up to that. That's good. All right. So we're going to go ahead and conclude with your introduction in English. So to you, the viewer, this is the time to see what you got right or wrong in the beginning. Okay. So we know that your name is Violeta. And Violeta, where are you from?
I am from the grand and wonderful city that is Detroit, but I live outside the city in Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Muy bien. Your job or jobs, what do you do?
I am a social worker and a psychotherapist.
Muy bien. And whenever you do have free time, what do you do for pastimes?
I'm pretty sure I said that I like to dance.
Mm-hmm.
I like to spend time with my partner.
Mm-hmm.
I like talking on the phone with my mom. And I think that's it. I should have said cocinar because I love to cook too. So.
Yeah, I don't remember cocinar, but I now remember you saying in general, that's about it because we're in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Yes. And then I said, well, you already told us a bit about your mom and your dad. Is there anybody else in your family you would like to talk about?
I mentioned that I have siblings. I have an older sister. She's the oldest of all of us. 2 older brothers, and I'm the youngest.
La Bebe. Yes, ma'am. And the last question was your favorite Latino song, and then singer.
Singer. So right now, my anthem, my favorite song is Vivir Mi Vida, Living My Life. Mark Anthony. It's a classic. I feel like it's a song, that can really help your spirit during times of struggle. And then I mentioned there's an artist who I really like right now, Camilo. And it's a lot of artists coming out of Colombia who are dominating the Latino music industry, and I really enjoy them as well.
All right, excelente. Well, it has been un placer to have you on the program. Thank you for all of the eye-opening points, all of the great historia that you brought to this, and I appreciate you taking out your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tasha. Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Gracias a ti.
Ciao.
Bye.